Hello there folks, my name is Spoonks and I saw Gladiator 2 and I didn't really care for it. Now, I was pretty curious about this movie. I love the first Gladiator. I think it's a really solid action epic, and I was curious to see how they would follow that story up 24 years later. The trailers looked really promising, and I was very interested in seeing this movie, especially with the new casting additions, Pedro Pascal and Denzel Washington especially. Yeah, I was really looking forward to this movie and willing to give it a chance, but while I wouldn't call it bad necessary, I wouldn't even call it terrible. I was still a bit let down by this movie. I found it to be a pretty big disappointment and overall just very mediocre and not really it didn't really live up to the legacy of the first film in my opinion. Starting with my positives for the film, I really liked the action sequences here. Sure, they may rely a bit too much on the CGI here, but I still found them to be very intense, exciting, fun action sequences whether it would be the smaller hand-to-hand combat sequences or the large-scale entertainment that would take place in like the big arenas. I found them to be very entertaining, very intense, well shot, well choreographed, and even with the larger scale sequences, they get so bizarre and ridiculous that I just found them so entertaining. Their use of animals and water and aquatics, it gets to a ridiculous degree, but I found it to be definitely worthy of the previous film's legacy. I found them to be so ridiculous that they pretty much entertained me in that regard, and they're also super violent as well. I think that really adds to the action here, just how violent and even at times grisly the carnage is and gets in this movie. I found that to really add to the action and the intensity and the weight of the stakes here. In terms of characters, the two standouts for me were Denzel Washington and Pedro Pascal. Not only were their performances the highlights of the film in my opinion, especially Denzel, he was having the time of his life playing the villain in this movie, and every time he was on screen, the film had life, it had energy, and kept me invested. His character was definitely the most interesting and best character in the film for sure. He pretty much brought his A game and the film's whole A game to the movie here. And Pedro Pascal, while he's not in the movie as much as I thought he would be, honestly, I thought it was kind of a waste of him. He makes the most out of his limited screen time here. I thought he did a great job and felt like he honestly lived up to Russell Crowe in a sense. I felt like he should have been the main character, honestly, because his arc and what his character goes through in the movie was really interesting and captivating to follow through, and I wish we got to see more of him in the movie, but for the little time he was on screen, I thoroughly enjoyed his presence. And lastly, I will say the second half of this movie is much better than the first half. It's still not good. I was still rather uninterested in what was going on, but this is where a lot more of the story beats start to hit. There's a lot more reveals and a lot more at stake. The stakes get higher pretty much here, and a lot more interesting, captivating stuff goes on in the second half, and I felt like that part of the film was at least trying to attempt to reach the heights of the first film. It just wasn't able to, but you know, there were still some moments that caught my eye, caught my attention, and made me go, oh, okay, I'm interested in seeing where it's going here, even with it not really interesting me that much. And now on to my negatives with the film. First off, the story here was weak. I found it to be really uninteresting, really unengaging, and honestly kind of a rehash of the first film. Pretty much the main character of this one goes through a pretty similar arc to the Russell Crowe's character in the first Gladiator. He loses someone he loves, and then he's forced to fight for Rome as a gladiator, so on and so forth. But it wasn't as impactful, it wasn't as exciting or as engaging because the character is just really bland and uninteresting. I didn't find his character to have the screen presence or power that Maximus did in the first film. I didn't think it was the problem with Paul Mescal. I think he did as good enough job as he could. It's just that his character is just so bland and so poorly written here. I just didn't really find him all that interesting. So you're pretty much watching the same movie with a much less interesting main character, and that goes for the rest of the cast as well, outside of Pedro Pascal, who once again is barely in the movie, and Denzel Washington. I found a lot of the other characters to not really be that interesting or fun to watch here either. They were just really bland, forgettable characters, or they were just really goofy and silly, and it seemed like some of the actors were trying to go for what Denzel was going for, hamming it up, having fun, chewing up the scenery here, but they didn't have, his presence and his game really, so it just came across as really goofy and silly with what some of these other actors were trying to do with these characters here. And this movie also went on forever. Despite this being 20 minutes shorter than Wicked, it felt way longer than that movie, with a climax that just never seemed like it was going to end. I found it really, really long to get through. It felt really, really slow at times, which I get for certain sequences, but when even some of the big action set pieces and sequences felt really slow and felt like they were taking forever to get going, that's a problem. The movie should not feel this slow and this long, if you know what I mean. So yeah, overall, I didn't really care for Gladiator 2. I wanted to like it. I loved the first one, and this movie isn't without its positives. Again, Denzel, Pedro Pascal, the action sequences, and definitely a much stronger second half. But overall, I was pretty bored and uninterested with this movie altogether. I found the story to be really uninteresting, way too many characters, too many subplots, and even a bit of a rehash of the first film. Those characters themselves weren't really that interesting or engaging, and it felt way longer than it actually was. If you're a fan of the first Gladiator, I'd say maybe watch this if you're really that interested, probably when it hits on demand, when it hits streaming. I can't really say go check this out at the theater. I was just so uninterested and so bored. It's not the worst movie of the year. It's not awful by any means. If you're really that interested, I guess go check it out, but this is definitely not a high glowing recommendation for me, if you can imagine. I was just so let down. I just really didn't care for this. I'm probably making it out to be worse than it actually is. Again, I don't hate this movie, but man, it just really didn't deliver what the first film did. I didn't really care for it. So those are my thoughts on Gladiator 2. What did you all think of it? If you've seen it, did you like it? Did you hate it? Comment down below and let me know. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this channel, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on all those social media links at the end of the video. And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.